Welcome back, guys. We are up to topic 5.3 of the APUSH curriculum titled The Mexican-American War. Now, this topic is going to tie directly into what we looked at in 5.2, which was Manifest Destiny. And this is a conflict that has some pretty important causes and effects, and it's a major step on the way to the Civil War. We're going to be setting up some stuff here that it'll really pay off later as we get closer to the Civil War. So if you ever have a question on the AP test, and it's been a common theme of something about the road to the Civil War, about cause of the Civil War, be familiar with this Mexican-American War because it definitely is going to play a role in how we get into a later Civil War. All right, let's get into the topic, see what's going on. And causes and effects, guys, as always, that's our goal here. What were the causes and effects of the Mexican-American War? By the way, sometimes this war is simply referred to as the Mexican War, but the AP curriculum specifically calls it the Mexican-American War. Don't get confused. It's the same war. All right, let's get into some causes. So to understand the Mexican-American War, we really have to go back to an election of 1844, in which John Tyler, who's the incumbent, is not going to run for re-election. Instead, his party is going to run James K. Polk of Tennessee, who comes out very much in favor of annexing Texas. Remember, Texas was an independent republic at this time period, but not part of the United States just yet. His Whig counterpart is one Henry Clay, the great compromiser, a guy we've talked a lot about, we'll continue to talk about. He favors annexing Texas, but he also says we should maybe put that annexation off for a while. So he's a little bit kind of, I want to do this, but just not right now. Either way, both candidates are showing some support for annexing Texas, and both of them come from slave-owning states, and that's going to be important for our understanding what's going to happen next. So Southerners in this election basically say that, if Texas annexation is not part of the next administration, then we might just walk away from this country. We might just break away. Texas or disunion was their aggressive slogan. And this, of course, will not be the last time that the South threatens this idea of secession if they don't get what they want. And specifically what they want, of course, is Texas. So they got lots of land in which they can spread slavery further west. Well, Polk is going to win this election, not by a whole lot. In fact, if you look at the popular vote, it's very, very close. And it came down to New York with its 36 electoral votes, and there Clay lost just by a couple thousand votes. So really, in the grand scheme of things, this was a razor-thin margin. Nonetheless, James K. Polk sees his victory as a mandate. And when politicians say they have a mandate, what they mean is basically the people have spoken and they support my agenda, and therefore I should carry out my agenda. His agenda was more manifest destiny. So, in early 1845, Texas is, in fact, admitted as a state. It was invited by joint resolution of Congress, so both houses agreed, in other words. And now Texas is a state, a slave-owning state in the Union. Now, of course, what country is going to be really upset about this? Well, Mexico. And the reason for this is when Texas had got its independence from Mexico, Texans believed that basically they owned all this land through here, in addition to what they have over here. Mexico didn't agree. They never really agreed with Texas independence, period, but they certainly did not agree that Texas should extend down to this area anyways. Now that Texas is part of the United States, it's not just an issue between Texas and the United States, it's now an issue between Mexico and the United States as to where the border is. Now, James K. Polk believes that it should be the Rio Grande or Rio Grande. That should be the American border. Mexico disagrees. They believe the border should be up here. So you have this area, kind of this disputed zone where both countries see that land as their own. And that is going to be the source of conflict. Now, before we get to that, though, what James K. Polk is really hoping to do is he wanted to get his hands on California. Especially the port city of San Francisco. San Francisco, one of the great natural harbors in the world, and Polk sees this as kind of a key component of manifest destiny that Americans need. As we settle out west, we need a port city to export those materials to the rest of the world. So having San Francisco was a key component of his plan, and already we have thousands of Americans living out here, even though it's not technically American land. So we're going to try this the peaceful route first. In 1845, new President James K. Polk sends a negotiator named John Slidell down to Mexico with an offer. We'll give you $25 million if you let us have California. This is kind of similar to how we approached France about the Louisiana territory. You know, we'll give you some money, you give us the land, we'll be happy, you'll be happy, there we go. But Mexico decides they don't want to, and part of this is kind of pride. They don't like the idea of selling out this territory to Americans, because Mexico really saw themselves as a serious, upstanding country, and they don't like the idea of having to sell off part of their land to a country they already see as an aggressor. So if Mexico won't sell us the land, well, we decide we gotta, take it. So what happens is, in early 1846, James K. Polk sends several thousand soldiers down to this disputed zone, right down to the Rio Grande, under the leadership of future President General Zachary Taylor. Now, this was a pretty provocative action. Now, from our perspective, we can say, well, it's just our land, right? I mean, we're still on American soil down here. But Mexico, remember, they said this was Mexican soil. And so what James K. Polk is hoping is this might bait the Mexicans to cross this line and attack us. Then we can say we're under attack. And that's exactly what happens. On April 25th, 1846, Mexican soldiers do cross the Rio Grande into what they saw as Mexican territory, what we saw as U.S. soil, and there's a skirmish. And Polk immediately contacts Congress and basically says, we've been invaded, and American soil is stained by American blood. He makes it very dramatic. And Congress will then overwhelmingly approve of Polk's call for war. You can see the vote here in the Senate and in the House. Now, there was a member of the House, you can see him right here, who was in the middle of serving his one and only term in the House. He was from Illinois. And he was very skeptical. He was a Whig politician, by the way. He was very skeptical of the administration's claim about American blood being spilled on American soil. And in fact, he took to the floor of the House to demand to know the spot on which American blood had been shed. And people kind of laughed him down. And for his desire to know the spot on American soil, he was known as Spotty Lincoln. This, of course, is Abraham Lincoln in his one and only term in the House. So let's get into the war itself and talk about the effects. We're not going to go through every last battle or anything, but basically, this is an overwhelming American victory. Okay, so American forces are going to head west and secure California. American forces are going to head south across the Rio Grande under Zachary Taylor. There's also going to be an amphibious invasion down here at Veracruz by Winfield Scott, and he's going to march across this land and take Mexico City. So very few real victories for Mexico. It's just a really impressive string of victories for America, overwhelming Mexico. Now, if you recall, we had offered to buy California for $25 before the war, and we did definitely see ourselves as the victim in this war, right? We'd been attacked. We're just defending ourselves. That's our claim. So when it comes time for a treaty, let's see how that matches up to this idea of us being the victims. It's called the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo. And when this was signed, basically Mexico was going to give up California, but also the northern half of their country. So all this land right through here also taken. It's called the Mexican Cession. To cede land is to give it to somebody or to give up on it. And for all this land, we are going to give Mexico $15 million. Now, a lot of critics pointed to this and said, well, wait a minute. If we truly are the victims in this war, and this truly was a moral war, then why are we paying Mexico anything? And so some people saw this $15 million we're offering up to Mexico as kind of a sign of a guilty conscience. So we felt kind of bad about how we'd gotten into this war and how it was prosecuted. Nonetheless, the treaty does pass the Senate, and now we have all of this land. You'll notice, though, it's not unanimous. There's a fair amount of opposition because treaties do have to pass by a margin of 2/3 in the Senate, and while they certainly have that margin, it's not exactly unanimous. And we have to think about why some people would have been a little skeptical of adding all this land. And we'll get into those details here in just a moment. All right, a couple of other effects. The size of America basically was, well, we added about 1/3 more land to our country. So this is a huge chunk of land, not quite Louisiana Territory big, but gigantic still in its own right. We're talking, again, places like California. California by itself is easily the size of most other countries. So we're gaining lots and lots of land. And because it went so, relatively easily for us in this war, it's going to stimulate even more manifest destiny. People are already talking about taking more land from Mexico, or maybe even going down to Central America or the Caribbean and taking more land to build more states. Particularly in the South, they like this idea because that would give them even more slave states. Other effects of this war. We're going to see a lot of young officers in this conflict get some war experience, some battlefield experience that they will later apply to the Civil War. People like Robert E. Lee, who will, of course, become the commander of Southern forces in the Civil War, and future president and general during the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant, both participated in this war. The fact that we had taken on Mexico and won so easily gained America more respect, and people took us a lot more seriously after that, because Mexico was not really a backwards country or anything. They had a pretty large military, and physically they were a very large country. So the fact that we were able to beat them so easily really opened a lot of eyes, and we gained, again, a lot of respect. However, south of the border, not so much. Mexico and other countries south of Mexico came to see us as the Colossus of the North, this big country that gobbles up territory and kind of pushes other smaller countries around. And, we're not making any friends south of the border from this war. Internally, it's also going to be an issue, because what's happening is sectional tensions over slavery, which are already, getting pretty hot, are going to get much hotter because of this war, because all this new territory, we have to decide, is it going to be slave or free? And that's going to become a major political issue. So if there's tension over this idea of spreading slavery because of this war, and if this war was not about expanding slavery, as many people said it wasn't, what could Congress do to make sure slavery never exists in these lands? And what they could do, of course, is pass a law. So David Wilmot of Pennsylvania, which of course is a free state, he had introduced this piece of legislation into the House. We call it the Wilmot Proviso, and what this said was that if we gain land from this Mexican war, then we should go ahead and say right now that slavery should never exist in any of that territory, because the South, remember, they're saying, oh, wait, no, this is definitely not a war to spread slavery. Of course not. We're just defending our honor and our territorial sovereignty and all that. And the North, of course, saw it very differently. Now, the Wilmot Proviso did pass the House, but not the Senate, because remember, the Senate is a place where it's pretty even between North and South, and most of the free states were totally behind this idea. Southern states definitely not, because a lot of Southern states said that, we're not going to give up this territory because this could be potential slave territory, plus a good chunk of the volunteers in this Mexican war were from the South, and so the South, from the Southern perspective, they saw this as kind of, their just rewards for fighting this conflict against Mexico. So the Wilmot Proviso never becomes law, but it is, again, evidence of that tension between North and South over potential new lands and whether that land should be free or slave. All right, causes and effects, guys, we covered them both. As I said with Manifest Destiny, this is a big, important topic on the road to the Civil War. So make sure you remember the causes and effects. Of the two, definitely focus on the effects, as they will play a major role on the road to the Civil War. All right, guys, so that's it for the Mexican War. We'll move on in Period 3 in our next video.